Hello, welcome everybody to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Tessers. I am a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for very, very, very many reasons. And that's actually what I'm going to start off by talking about today, I think. This is just an open conversation for those of you who are here, especially obviously those of you who are here in the chat. Whatever you put, I see, whether that's questions, comments, just we shape each other. The things I say will draw your attention to things. The things you say will draw my attention to things. So we figure it out together. I do usually pick a topic to start by talking about, and I have one for today, like I just mentioned, but we can go wherever. Whatever you guys want to talk about, doesn't matter if it's a completely different topic, if it's a whatever, we'll go where we go. Although I do try to, I guess, keep it somewhat relevant or helpful in terms of like talking about neurodiversity or executive functioning or something like that. But I suppose it doesn't have to be that. Maybe one day we'll just talk about our favorite movies. I don't know. I run a practice called Effective Artistry that offers therapy and executive functioning coaching services. That's our logo up there in the corner if you're interested. And as a quick note / request for help / invitation, in the process of putting together a cohort of people to train up as executive functioning coaches, starting most likely in May. If anybody knows anyone that is interested in that, send them our way. We have already gotten a lot more interest than we have room for, but I always want to hear from more people because we're doing a cohort. We're trying to put together the group that's most likely to work well together and balance each other and all that kind of stuff. We'll do more of them in the future. I think that's mostly it. So anyway, here we are. I went over a lot of different things to potentially talk about today because there's a lot that's on my mind. But one of those things that I was thinking of is about why this is not therapy, that This Is Not Therapy Hour is not therapy. I didn't start there or think of it for that reason. But once I was thinking of it and realized that is the case, I said, oh, that's a good thing to talk about. I'm going to step away just to turn on the air conditioning, which is a nice thing to have to do. I love my office, and there's lots of windows, but sometimes on a sunny day, it starts to get really hot all of a sudden. And I'm a sweater. And I'm wearing a sweater. Anyway. So, therapy. What is therapy? I think that there is generally a misconception about what therapy is, and I think that I've been contributing to that misconception, which is part of why I want to talk about this today so that I can clear it up. In case I have been contributing to it, maybe I'm just overanalyzing things, I'm prone to that. I talk with people a lot about there's only two ways to get new information, new data. Really, there's only one, but there's a subset of that one that's pretty significant. We'll call it a second thing, which is neither of those things is thinking. Thinking isn't about getting new information. You can combine information you have in new ways, come up with new ideas about what you can do and what you can try or how to think over define a thing. But if nothing else, you're using existing language that you already have in order to come up with those new things. Thinking doesn't generate new information. It's about rearranging information that you have, running different scenarios to come up with ideas of how to go about things or combine things that will work for you. To get new information, you have to get it from the environment, through your sensory organs, through your perception. And that's the one way, but there's a significant chunk that we're going to call a second thing. So you experience things, you hear, you see, you feel, you taste, you smell, proprioception, the kinesthetic sense, vestibular sense, interoception, all these various different senses we have, way more than 5, which is still to this day one of the weirder things I think that we teach children, that there are 5 senses when there are self-evidently more than that. Or in particular, I don't know if this still happens, but I think it does, teaching kids that there's different parts of the tongue responsible for different taste receptors, which is also obviously not true. Anyway. New information comes from the world, the environment. But there's a particular thing we call communication, meaning I can either get new information by experiencing something for myself, or by somebody else using language or whatever means of communication that we're using to create in my mind the idea of an experience, even though I'm not actually experiencing it. If I say, I'm having the experience of drinking this cup of tea and how hot it is, there's actually a word for this, qualia. It might be qualia. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone say it out loud. How hot this tea mug feels is qualia. It is the hotness of this mug. It's not something that can be put into language. We can use language to hint at it and describe it, and we can use more and more particular language, or just a lot more language to try and get closer. I could use temperature and degrees and those things, but none of that will encapsulate the experience of what it feels, the actual hotness of it. Usually when people are talking about qualia, they talk about like the redness of red. This red has this redness to it. It's the particulars. But I could also say to you, oh, this tea is warm. Not so hot that I can't hold it. In fact, hot enough that it's very pleasant for me to put my hand around it like this. I can't leave it like that for too long. It starts to get hot and I got to take it off. But it's nice while I'm doing it. And me saying those words created for you, if you're listening, some version of that experience, some conceptual way of approaching the idea of how hot this mug of tea is. Because therapy is generally, we're talking about talk therapy here. And of course, there are many different kinds of therapy, which I guess I should pay more attention to when I say therapy. I'm almost always referring to talk therapy. Because talk therapy is about talking, there's a misconception that it's the content of the words that matter, that the ideas that matter, that the way that a therapist can be helpful to somebody is to teach them something, give them some knowledge, some advice, some idea that they didn't already have. And it's not that it's not helpful in that way, but it's not any more helpful in that way than any other conversation you could have with anybody else, except that maybe your therapist has a particular specialization or some particularly useful or commonly useful knowledge about something. The thing that's unique about therapy is the experience of being in therapy. And that is I feel like such a weird way to say that. So let me clarify a little bit more. I talk about a lot, those of you who've been here before probably heard me say something like, the simplest answer that works is the best one, but if it doesn't work, you got to get more complex. So I define these words to mean different things. I do that. We've talked about it before. It's part of how I cognitively can approach the world, which is relevant here, I guess. But so let me clarify that when I am talking about complexity or simplicity, I'm talking about resource expenditure of a particular type. So when I'm saying that something is difficult or easy, or hard or easy, what I'm talking about is the cost. It varies from person to person and context to context, but generally, if I'm saying something is difficult, that means that it takes a lot of resources by whatever subjective means, seems relevant in that conversation. If something's easy, it takes few resources. Complexity and simplicity is a subset of that. Complexity and simplicity is how much of those resources need to be spent on cognition as opposed to physicality, right? How much of your cognitive resources does it take to think about, understand, comprehend, ideate, whatever, stuff that happens all up here. So things can be simple, but very difficult. Building a brick wall is probably not something that, well, I guess I would have to think about it a lot because I don't know it. But once you know it, you probably don't have to think about it too much. It's not too complicated once you've learned the process. There's an assumption here. But it is still difficult to do. It takes time and it takes energy. It takes effort. You got to spread that effort out over a period of time so that you don't burn yourself out, etc. Something can be simple and difficult. The converse is not true. It can't be complex and also easy, because being complex is spending resources on the cognition, the thinking. If you have to spend a lot of cognitive resources, then you're spending a lot of resources, even if there's nothing else besides the complexity, which there always has to be at least something else, because just thinking for the most part won't accomplish much. There are some things it can do, but it's all about your internal subjective experience. And when I say that the simplest answer that works is the best one, I mean that the thing that takes the least amount of thought is the best one. The thing that is the easiest is the best solution for a person. Of course, that it has to work. And sometimes something that is simple or easy or both works for some people and doesn't work for others. And we've talked about all that kind of stuff and how to get more complex. When I'm talking like this, when I'm doing presentations, when I'm on podcasts, I'm talking about a lot of complex things, a lot of very complicated stuff. It's all very thinking focused. And that's where I'm worried that I've contributed to this. I've been contributing to this misconception about what is valuable about therapy, because many, many therapists also believe that this is what's valuable about therapy, is my ability or the therapist's ability to hold complex thoughts, to take something and analyze it and pull it apart and put it back together and hold different information and how they relate to each other and come up with very complex things that are useful. And therefore the value of the therapy is the fact that the therapist can come up with complicated ways of looking at things. And again, that can be part of what's helpful about therapy, but that can be helpful in any communication. If somebody offers you an idea that is helpful to you, great. What's really helpful about therapy is the experience. And I've been running into this problem a lot. I've had to talk about this a lot, not only with clients and potential clients and, colleagues, but with other practitioners as well. It's a large part of imposter syndrome for sure, especially specifically among therapists, just because that's what I know most. But I think probably generally speaking, there's a large part of imposter syndrome because it leads to the conclusion that your value is in whether what you say ends up being useful or not. If what you say is right or correct or whatever words you're using for, helpful, you get an idea that is helpful to a person, then good, you did a good job, you're a good therapist. And if what you say, what you think and express does not help them to change something or feel better or whatever various, whatever the aim is that you're approaching, if whatever you do doesn't help with that in a way that you can identify, then you feel like you're a bad therapist. I think this probably applies to most, I was going to say professions, but probably applies to most identities just generally. Anything that you define yourself as, you want to be a good version of that thing. So I wrote this phrase a while back that was like cryptic and ridiculous, as I often am, that said that therapy is looking for the monster in the closet. But even that makes it sound so like intellectual and dramatic. Oh, we're looking for the root experience inside your brain. And that's not what I mean. What I mean is we can talk, we can communicate about all kinds of things, but the act of communicating means it requires that we have simplified whatever thing we're communicating about. Like we were talking about with the mug of tea. Just putting something into words or in whatever way that you're communicating to somebody about it. Using signs, semiotic, semiology, right? We've made a connection between something, like right now I'm making sounds, and those sounds your ears are picking up, after being translated through the computer, however that works. Not my area of specialty. And then you pay attention and I almost read that comment and I'm supposed to not swear, but yes, nobody likes imposter syndrome. You want to know something fascinating about imposter syndrome? Research is limited and whatever, but good. The surveys show that 70% of people experience imposter syndrome. Isn't that fascinating? Everybody is thinking, 70% of people think that they're the only ones that are struggling with, not feeling as though they belong. Anyway, in order to communicate about something, we have to make it simple. We have to use signs. I say fire, and of course the experience of that fire, even my memory of it, which is already simplified from the actual experience of it, is way more complex than I can convey in just the word fire. And even if I spent 5 minutes talking about it, I'm still not going to be able to convey all of that information, the heat and the the feel and the sound and the sight and the, all that stuff. That's part of why talking about things is helpful, is because even if the other person doesn't hear you and doesn't respond, like talking out loud to yourself can be helpful, because it forces you to take something that is very complex, that you have a lot of information about, and choose a way to simplify it. And because you do that, it now becomes more simple to you. We lose things in that process. And what we're trying to do in communication is make sure that the relevant and important things are maintained in the communication, and all the stuff that we lose didn't matter anyway. And of course, we're wrong about that all the time. We miscommunicate all the time. But there are limits to what we can do there. Probably everybody here has watched something or read a poem or something particularly evocative that really made you feel as though that experience was happening to you, and yet it wasn't. So there's something missing there, right? There is some noticeable difference between the communication and the actual experience. When I say therapy is looking for the monster in the closet, what I mean is, if you're in bed, you're a kid in bed, and all of a sudden, for some reason, you get the idea that there might be a monster in your closet, whatever that reason is. You get that idea. As soon as you have that idea, it's distressing, because it's a monster. Whatever you're defining a monster as, the word means something scary that you don't like, right? You think that there might be something in there, and you can't confirm using your senses that it's not actually there, and unless you go and look. But if it was actually there and you went and looked and opened the door, then you'd be vulnerable. So you can't actually check. I can, or a parent can, you can, whatever in this metaphor, talk to that child and explain all the reasons that there is no monster in the closet. Monsters aren't real. Even if monsters were real, your closet is full. Nothing could fit in there. I could say all that stuff. It's all true. I believe it's all true. I guess other people might think differently. And it might work, and it might not. If it doesn't, if me trying to communicate with you and using logic and language and symbols doesn't erase the fear, then the only other thing that I can do is go open the closet so that you can experience it and see that what you were worried was going to be there isn't there. You can't do it on your own, because if you were to do it on your own and you were right that it is what you're worried it's going to be, there's nobody around to help you. You're right there. The monster will get you. But if I'm there and I'm your parent, and I'm thinking of my actual kids now, although we've only had to check for a monster in the closet maybe once or twice so far, I can go open it so that you can have the experience of seeing it, but you were safe all along. Even if there was something in there, you're not the one opening it. You're not right there. You're still going to be scared while I open it, because what if it gets me and then you and whatever, but it's a lot more safe. It's the experience of it. It's not that I can explain to you logically and in great detail so that you can understand that there's no monster there. It's that we can open the door together and feel safe in doing so and see what's there. So in terms of therapy, what that means is people come to therapy because they're experiencing things that they don't want to experience, or because there's things that they do want to be experiencing that they're not experiencing, right? But generally it's more the former. It's problems. It's bad things that you want gone, at least at the start. A lot of the time, people have done everything they can do cognitively to try and resolve that. I will hear people all the time saying, I know it's not rational. I say it myself. I'm feeling this. I know it's not rational, but that doesn't change it. That doesn't enable me to feel differently. I'm going to come back to that comment in just a second. If that theorizing isn't working, and in fact, a lot of the time, trying to solve problems cognitively actually makes it worse, especially when it involves somebody else's experience that you don't have evidence. Let me rephrase that. When it involves somebody else's experience, their internal experience, and the only evidence you can have to make any suggestion that they might be thinking or feeling something is based on what you're observing them do. And then you're making connections and drawing patterns and whatever to make guesses about what's going on inside. Maybe they just tell you directly and that helps, but again, that's oversimplified because it has to be. Or maybe they're trying to hide something, or you think they're trying to hide something. And if you are worried about how other people perceive you, how you're impacting other people, whether someone likes you or doesn't like you, you can't figure that out by thinking about it. And especially when you're good at thinking about things and solving other problems by thinking about it, you're going to try and solve that one by thinking about it. And when it doesn't work, you're going to think most likely that the reason it's not working is because you haven't thought about it hard enough, and you think harder and harder, and there is no solution. A lot of that stuff, the only way to figure out whether or not the problem that you're worried might exist, the monster that you think might be there, even though you know it can't be, but maybe it is, right, is to go open the closet door. So therapy is, in that sense, about safety, unconditional positive regard. It's you say or do whatever you want to say or do. You can stop. Of course, this requires building the therapeutic relationship. You can stop editing yourself. You can stop worrying about, if I say this, what will they think about me, et cetera, et cetera. That's what's supposed to be helpful about it, is that you can drop that layer of self-censorship. Oh man, that word has taken on a different meaning lately, and I should probably not use that phrase. Of before you say or do anything, you got to think, how might this impact somebody? Will this make them dislike me, etc.? And just start to be able to be free and see what happens when you're free. What happens when you stop trying so hard to make sure that you don't hurt somebody, to make sure, because you're not going to hurt your therapist. That's the idea, right? And this is a great example of how it goes wrong, is if you and or your therapist both think that the value of therapy is in their ability to analyze you and give you complex understanding about yourself, then part of the contract there is that everything you say will be judged. Doesn't mean it'll be judged as good or bad, but it will affect how the person perceives you, and you have to take that into consideration. If I say that I was very close with my mother, I wonder how the therapist might incorporate that into their analysis of me. In particular, if the therapist is feeling like that's the way to be helpful, then they're putting pressure on themselves, right? I feel like a good therapist if I've said something that you liked and helped you, and I feel like a bad therapist if I've said something you didn't like or failed to say something that you like. But instead of judging myself, it's really that I'm judging you. I, the therapist, am judging you. If how I feel about myself, good or bad, depends on how I view myself as a therapist, and how I view myself as a therapist depends on your experience reported to me. If you say you've been doing well, I feel good. If you say you've been doing bad, I feel bad. Then really it's just putting a lot of pressure on you to tell me that the things that I'm doing are helpful to you. And there are therapists who do this kind of work, who acknowledge all this and understand that there are ways of working around these things, talking in that intellectual, analytical way and accommodating for this stuff. I know that people try. I don't know how well it goes in any individual case. But really, yeah, it's the opposite. It's like trying to think your way out of anxiety. You're feeling anxious because of something you're thinking about. Trying to think your way out of that more often than not is just going to make it worse. So I wanted to make it clear that the way I talk here in these things, this is just me talking into the void. I know there are people here and I appreciate the comments, but this is just me sharing concepts. And even if there's a bunch of people here and a bunch of chats, and I can't dial in and get specific and have a particular interaction with any one of you. And more importantly, even though I'm going to be fine no matter what any one of you says or doesn't say or whatever, you can't think about that as being indicative of you. You could always just say, well, maybe he didn't notice it, or it's other people or whatever, as opposed to, no, it's just you and me here and I'm focused directly on you. And so if I'm okay, you have to know that I'm looking at you and focusing on you and everything you're doing and saying, and I'm still okay. I don't try to replicate that in this. It would be a ridiculous, I don't even know how you would try to replicate that in this. But in a session, in therapy, it's different. It's us figuring stuff out together. This, I'm trying to say things that are general, which is, I know I make fun of myself for being philosophical, and I do like being philosophical. But I do that mostly here because that's how I can do things generally. And I don't get a lot of specifics here, right? I'm answering big, broad questions or providing things that seem interesting or helpful or relevant to me in the hopes or the thought that it might be you. There's a third person here. It's the stream. Yeah. So I just wanted that to be out there, that this isn't about intelligence. This isn't about cleverness or ability to analyze or use language in fanciful ways or the right terminology. That's very useful in presenting and all kinds of things. But what's useful in the actual therapy is being able to be present with somebody else, being able to pay very close attention to somebody else, and being able to be fine no matter what you notice from the other person. I can open the closet door and, hey, look, that thing you were worried about, if you said it, that everyone would abandon you, you said it and I didn't abandon you. Does that mean no one will? No. But it means at least that it's not what you were worried that it would be. And we can talk about it. There's a lot written in, like, especially in psychotherapy stuff, about the power of the things that are not said, right? Anyway, let's go look at some comments now. I was having lunch with one of my heroes, 6'2", blonde hair, blue eye, MBA, great career, great wife, great kids. Thought I was being vulnerable. I confessed my past struggles with imposter syndrome. He had everything I wish I had, yet he confessed to struggles with imposter syndrome. Yeah. We've been talking about imposter syndrome the last few weeks. And yeah, like I just said, 70% of people, right? Obviously, it can't actually correlate with some observed deficiency of some kind or some actual not belongingness, because 70% of people can't all be that far below average. In fact, 70% of people can't be below average at all. And that's also a great example of what we're just talking about, is the ability to be somebody who says, I experience imposter syndrome, so that the other person now feels safe to also say, yeah, I also experience imposter syndrome, and you both feel better. Because part of what imposter syndrome is the fear that if you reveal to somebody that you are feeling imposter syndrome, that they will then either confirm that you are an imposter, or that they will now think of you differently or be suspicious or doubtful of your ability. But if instead you say it and the response you get is, yeah, me too, that is a helpful experience. You feel less alone with it. You can start to explore it and talk it through. I think that's part of what I'm looking for. Oh, wait, I think I skipped something. Oh, the other thing that might be relevant to that, and this is off of what we've been talking about, which is why I didn't think of it first. There's a concept called the Hedonic Treadmill, which basically just means you get used to things fast, and we prioritize negative information. So no matter what it is that you're wanting to have, wanting to experience, once you have it, once you experience it, there's only so long that it will continue to hold your attention, and that you'll approach it with that same level of awareness and appreciation, gratitude, or whatever, before it just starts to become part of the background. Anytime you have identified a thing you want, and you look at it, you research it, and you want it so bad, and you buy it and you get it, and then as soon as you have it, it's as enjoyable as you thought it would be, and then 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, you haven't noticed it. This happens a lot, especially when you like move or start a new job or any big like contextual change like that. And in the first, especially 2 weeks to 3 weeks, it varies, but first 2 to 3 weeks, it's like every little thing that bothers you, you're noticing, and you want to work on changing and making it exactly the place you want it to be. And then that window closes, and any of those things that bothered you before and that you really wanted to fix, but you haven't, well, now they're just part of what this place is, and you stop noticing them. I'm looking at cords behind my computer that when I first moved into this office, I wanted to do all this cool cord management stuff and just couldn't get to it. And now it's been, I mean, we're coming up on 10 months or so, almost a little over 10 months in this office, I think. And I barely notice it anymore unless I'm talking about something like this. So if you think that the solution to imposter syndrome is getting something, whether that's a new role, a compliment, a reward, whatever, it won't be. It will be temporarily, and then you'll need something else. That's part of why some people just keep going for more and more and more and bigger and bigger and bigger, because like we were just talking about, if you think that thinking about a problem is the way to solve it, and then you start thinking about it, but it actually doesn't solve it, in fact, maybe even makes it worse, Well, now you're going to go think about it harder because you think that thinking about it is how to solve it. There's a lot of talk about this in family systems therapy approaches as well. We call it cybernetic systems and looping. And cybernetic just means a system that is self-monitoring and self-adjusting. So the classic example of that is a thermostat. And I know these days cybernetic, mostly people associate with like electronics and things. But it just means self-monitoring and self-adjusting. So a thermostat, you set what temperature you want it to be. I just turned on my air conditioning at the beginning of this for 71 degrees because I found that's the temperature that works well in this office. It's probably really cold for the therapist next door, the staff therapist next door. You said 71. So then what the thermostat has is three things. Your input, you said 71. A thermometer so that it can measure what is the actual ambient temperature, and then controls for the HVAC system, air conditioning or heating, right? If you set 71 and the thermometer says, yep, it's 71, then it's not doing anything. But as soon as it becomes 73 or 74 or whatever the target is, oop, it's getting too hot. Better send a signal to the HVAC to start doing air conditioning. And then as the air conditioning kicks in, it gets cooler, and now it's down to 71, and it sends the signal to stop, right? So it monitors what's happening and then adjusts based on that. What happens all the time in human relationships, humanity, I don't know, being a person, is that we glitch that stuff out. Imagine the thermostat, for whatever reason, that the wires got crossed, there's a short somewhere, and every time it's sending a signal to turn on the air conditioning, instead, it's actually turning on the heat. So if you set it at 71 and the thermometer now says it's 73, it says, oh, turn on the AC, but it actually turns on the heat. And so it's getting hotter. Now it's 74, 75. And it says, whoa, it's getting hotter. Even though I'm using the AC, I better bump that AC up, which really just puts the heat up. We call this cycling up, meaning that it's a feedback loop where the attempt to solve the problem actually makes the problem worse, but without whoever it is that's attempting to solve that problem in that way recognizing that that's what's happening. So problem gets worse, the attempted solution is engaged with even more, which makes the problem even worse, and so on and so forth. And then cycling down is the opposite, where attempted solution is actually working, and so it gets back and back down to whatever, baseline is. This gets into all kinds of stuff about homeostasis and equilibrium and whatever. It's all fascinating, but I'm just getting distracted, I think. Cybernetic system self-monitoring. We are all cybernetic. We monitor ourselves, and when we are experiencing something that's different than we want it to be, we adjust, we modify, we do something to make it so that our experience is what we want it to be. You get hungry, you eat. You get uncomfortable, you shift how you're sitting. You get bored, you go find something stimulating. But sometimes whatever we think the solution is actually either doesn't impact it or makes it worse. If it doesn't impact it, then a problem just persists. If it makes it worse, the problem gets worse. And of course, there's other variables too. A problem can get worse even if your solution isn't making it worse, obviously. Why did I start talking about this? Imposter syndrome. Oh, because if you are feeling like a fraud, an imposter, and you think that the solution to that is some kind of recognition or achievement or monetary gain or whatever, and you go and you work hard to get that thing, and it doesn't actually resolve that feeling of being an imposter, rather than immediately saying, oh, okay, I guess that's not how to solve this. Sometimes that happens, but very rarely. Usually it's going to be, oh, I guess I need to get even more than this. But then the problem gets worse because I've put in so much effort to trying to, and I'm getting all these accomplishments and achievements and recognitions because that's what I'm going for. And I'm making sacrifices to get it, but I still don't feel like I deserve it. As those things get bigger and bigger, I get even more acknowledgement and whatever, but I haven't figured out what the real reason that I'm feeling like an imposter is. I'm going to feel more and more and more like an imposter. And my attempts to get more and more and more stuff to remove that feeling from me is all going to just keep cycling up. Accomplishing things is not how you stop feeling like an imposter, because feeling like an imposter has nothing to do with what you're accomplishing. The whole point of it is that you feel as though what you are observably accomplishing in some way doesn't count. It's not about what you're doing. It's about how you feel about what you're doing. Usually, and we've talked about this, we won't spend more time on it unless people want. Usually that's about what you think is possible, what you think other people's experiences must be, the ways in which you think other people's experiences must be better than yours because of things that they're doing, which is why it's one of those monster in the closet things. It's not until you talk to somebody and find out that they feel the same that you realize, oh, maybe there's just not a way to feel as though you have deserved all your accomplishments, blah, 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 whatever. I think that's part of what I'm looking at there. If nothing else, I'd like to be able to speak to someone who I know will respond in an unbiased way. Yeah, that the most important thing about the therapeutic relationship is safety. The most important thing by a million miles. If you are feeling safe with your therapist, they could say a bunch of inane nonsense, I almost swore again, that doesn't help you at all. And it can still be a helpful experience because you are getting to say and talk through the things that you want to say and talk through, but are too scared to say and talk through in any other environment. My new office downsized, so I don't have a permanent desk. I have to take your usual stuff with you whenever you go in. That sucks. Yeah, this is one of those cycling things, right? That companies are saying, oh, okay, everybody wants to work from home. Cool, we'll accommodate that. And the truth is that it's actually better for business in many ways, depending on what it is that you do and how the team works together and whatever, because I can spend a lot less on my office if everybody's working remotely. But typically that's not how they're phrasing it. Usually companies are, if they're leaning into or doing something to enable people to work from home more, they're doing it like they're granting a boon. Like, okay, you guys want to work from home? We'll do that. Hey, by the way, that also means we can get a smaller office space and save a bundle. We're not going to give that extra money that we're saving to the employees or anything, but our profit looks better, the bottom line looks better. But because we're telling everybody we're doing it for them, we don't have to worry so much about terrible things like desk sharing, for example. I understand the compromise, and I'm not criticizing it because I don't have a better solution for anybody I have ideas, but I don't know. I'm just saying that it's counterproductive. You've made the experience of coming into the office, the gap between how pleasant or enjoyable or relaxing or whatever thing you think is the benefit of your employees being able to work from home versus how pleasurable or whatever it is to work at the office. Because typically that's how it's viewed, is that it's nicer to work from home, but it's less valuable, less productive or whatever. That's the trade-off. Well, the gap between how pleasurable it is to work from home versus at the office, if you're going into desk sharing and making people carry their stuff around and have no predictability and stuff, the gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You're making it so, which means that people are going to want to stay home more, which means maybe you'll downsize more and blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, that sucks. As far as a specific thing to do, and I'm sure you've already done this, is you just put together something that you can move quickly. If that's a bag, great. But honestly, look at things like tackle boxes, or space organizers. I'm trying to think of other examples there where you can have a spot for all your stuff and you can even label that stuff. So you put it all where it goes and you just carry the case and unpack it and then pack it back up. I hate it so much. I want to surround myself with all my stuff. Yeah. And that's another part of the problem with this, is that it disproportionately impacts different people. In particular, people who consider themselves to be neurodivergent are more likely to have a more negative response, be more negatively impacted. I was looking for a different word by this. The lack of consistency, the lack of routine, the sensory changes, the novelty that each day, like we were talking about, when you move, everything's interesting for the first few. If you're moving constantly, everything stays interesting, right? Makes it that much harder to focus. And yes, that impacts some people more than others, but it impacts everybody. I don't know. I am sure that there are people who like desk sharing, moving desks or having to sign out desks or whatever. I don't know what set of things must be true about a person or for a person for them to do better in that environment than worse, because of all the things we just talked about. I don't know I guess you'd have to feel safe and comfortable in the entire office. Feel as though all the potential spaces that you might be at, well enough that you don't have to pay close attention. Or maybe you just get really bored at work. And so the novelty that a lot of us might call distractions and whatever helps. I don't know. Pretty loud and talkative. I'm usually okay with that, but I need reassurance that I'm not bothering people. But people generally are really averse to confrontation. So I put a lot of effort into trying to make sure people feel okay with telling me if I'm bugging them. But that may or may not involve bugging them a lot. Yeah, that's one of those cycling up things. I'm worried that I talk too much for other people and that they actually want me to stop, but secretly are not, they're not telling me that. In fact, not only are they not telling me that, they're actively hiding it from me, or maybe even actively deceiving me to think that they want me to talk even more. This is one of those things that you cannot solve cognitively, because it does not matter what the other person says. What you're worried about is that they're lying. Literally anything that they say is going to, in fact, the more nice things that they say about you, the more you're going to worry that they're lying about it, that secretly they really don't like whatever you're doing. And so, yeah, you're trying to get them to communicate about it, but you're framing it in this negative way, right? Tell me if I'm bugging you. And yeah, that is probably harder for people to say. That's one of the reasons that it's hard for you to think your way out of this. Maybe people are lying to me, because some people would. It is socially awkward and difficult to tell people they're bugging you sometimes. I did that for a long time. I talk a lot, and I'm sure you've all heard me say things on here like I'm compelling and charming, and I'm kind of joking about myself, but I also have to say it out loud in that kind of joking way, because I still have not moved past the thought that maybe I'm talking too much, even though anybody who's here could easily go anywhere else. You're on your computer, but still, I can't shake that thought that maybe I'm talking more than people want me to. These days, I do it in that joking way where people can say something if they want, hopefully theoretically, because I put it on the table, but I'm also doing it in a joking way so that we all don't feel awkward and like, now you need to reassure Brandon because he's making fun of himself. But for a while, I would do instead, I'd just stop myself and I'd say, I'm sorry, I get excited and I tend to ramble, and I dominate conversations or whatever. To which people would almost always say, no, please, I'm interested, like say more. Because of course they are, not because of course I'm so interesting, but I am terrified of talking about things that people don't really want to talk about, which means that I'm watching people like a hawk for any sign that they don't want to hear more from me. If they were thinking it, I'd probably have noticed. So the vast majority of the time, all I'm really doing is forcing them to reassure me, saying, oh, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. And then they, no, please go on. I'm making them ask me to continue to talk, which is the opposite of what I'm trying to do, right? I want to be less of a bother. So then I become more worried about it. It cycles up. So yeah, I get that. But the only solution is either A, somebody has to start telling you that you're bothering them, in which case then you'll theoretically start to believe, because they said the socially awkward thing, oh, well, if they were bothered, this person is not uncomfortable with telling me, so I don't have to worry that they're lying. But what if you never bother them and they don't have reason to actually say it, right? Then it's about finding out how you want to impact people as opposed to finding out how you're trying to avoid impacting people. You don't want to bother them. What do you want to do? And you can ask about that. And it's usually a lot easier to have conversations to communicate about the things that you're trying to accomplish, as opposed to, oh, I hope I'm not bothering you. I don't want to work from home. If I want to ask if I, as someone who doesn't want to work from home, can claim a desk, but I haven't even worked there a month yet, so I'm trying to be quiet and suffer until I have more cred. Yeah, well, again, that's one of those things that thinking about is not going to solve for you. Unless you talk to somebody else that you think of as a trusted source of information about the office culture or whatever, and ask for their opinion on it, which requires that you feel safe with them. You're talking about cred, but really what you're talking about, you're saying cred, but really what you're talking about is safety. You want to feel as though even if the answer is no, that they're not going to be upset with you or write you off or have a negative first impression and never pay attention to you again, etc. Yeah. So one of two things. Either you have to just set yourself a time and say, at this point is when I feel like it's okay for me to ask about the desk, which could be tomorrow or could be once I've been here 6 months or whatever. Or you have to talk to somebody that you feel safe with, and at least safe enough to ask this question without getting negative repercussions, and that you think has some likelihood of knowing what's going on, so that you actually take their answer as a valuable, meaningful answer. Because if you just think, do I have enough cred? Do I have enough cred? You will never answer that question with yes. You may at some point say, this has gotten so bad, so unpleasant, so stressful or whatever, that I'm going to ask, even though it's a risk. But you're very unlikely, unless you just pick a time and set it, to ever say, is it an okay time to ask now? And answer yes. If I want novelty, I'll go to a coffee shop. I basically live at coffee shops anyway, but if I go into work, I want to have my office space. Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. It's counterproductive. There's a reason that the assembly line model took off, right? Like, people being able to ignore everything and focus just on whatever it is that they're trying to do makes them better able to do that thing. And novelty and, discomfort and feeling unsafe, all those things make you less able to focus on what's going on. We want consistency and comfort and safety. It's part of the reason working from home is very helpful. And of course, there are downsides too. I'm not saying that it's all upsides, the work from home stuff. There is communication that gets lost. You guys can only see me from here up, and there's theoretically data that you can pick up from me that you can't pick up over the computer. And we can't just run into each other. If we're going to talk, you and I, we have to set up a meeting for it instead of just popping out. As I go to get water, I see your office doors open and I say hi, and it turns into a conversation. What helps me is when they actively engage back at me. That helps the most, but all my friends are introverts. All right, I'm going to read the rest of the comments and then come back to that one, because otherwise I'll just start talking about introverts and extroverts. I read a lot in D&D because I engage a lot, which as a DM I know I enjoy, but I don't know the other players enough to know that they would mention if they feel I'm pushing too much or if I did anything that upsets them. Finding the balance between communicating and basically nagging for reassurance is really hard. Give me financial stability and enough institutional knowledge to be difficult to replace, and maybe I'll take my own desk. Interesting. Institute, that you become difficult to replace as you gain institutional knowledge. I want to talk about that too. I don't know, you guide me. I'll go back to the thing that was first, the introverts thing. I'll say it out loud. A lot of the stuff that I say out loud is stuff that most of us know already or experience, but I say it out loud anyway, because part of the point of neurodiversity is that you don't assume that somebody knows something just because you think it's common knowledge. But, so here it is. Engage people in areas of interest. Talk to people about things that they're interested in, either because they think it's fun. That's one way to know what they're interested in, is to look at the stuff that they're already interested in. Another way is to identify, this is my big thing, is to identify something that clearly is bothering them and offer something that might be helpful toward that end. If they think that it might be helpful, if you deliver it in that way, they're going to be interested in it. They're going to ask questions. Because people just self-reporting, I'm enjoying talking to you, well, that might be a lie. But it's a lot harder to think, if someone is going to misrepresent something, deceive you, it's a lot easier for them to say a phrase like, oh yes, I like talking to you, than it is to spend an hour in conversation with you, asking questions, giving you responses that indicate that I actually did hear what you said, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't be able to respond in the way that I'm responding. The more that you engage, the more comfortable you'll feel that they're not faking it. Of course, from personal experience, no matter what, I've had hours and hours long conversations, and there are still times that later on in the day, I'm like, oh God, I was just rambling on and bothering them. Yeah, so in the D&D instance, well, this is kind of related, I guess, the introverts thing. Introvert, extrovert, like like many psychological concepts, is very useful. It resonates with an experience that people have, and it's language that they can apply to something in a meaningful way. But it doesn't really exist in the sense that like some people are all the best definition out there. The one that I like the most in the common discussion about introvert extrovert is that introverts are drained by social interaction. Extroverts are energized by social interaction. And that's a good, like easy, quick rule to reference, but it's not actually a thing. You know, like that's like saying some people enjoy eating and some people don't enjoy eating. Like, yeah, that is a statement you can make, but there's a lot of information missing. Eating what and in what way and when and blah, blah, blah. An omnivert, I like that. Some social interaction is draining. Some social interaction is energizing. That is a true statement for, I guess I can't say every single person in the world, but more or less. You know, that's the way humans are wired. We don't generally go off into the woods, and if we do, we don't typically do very well. I don't just mean in surviving, I mean in like socially and emotionally, right? It's about the right kind. It's about finding social interaction that is energizing, as opposed to all social interaction is not. I've met many, many, many people who consider themselves hard and fast introverts. Never once have I met somebody who doesn't like talking to anybody in any way whatsoever, doesn't enjoy and seek out any social interaction. It can often be things like, for example, talking to people online, which is a different type of social interaction that might work better for them and therefore be less draining, or even pen pals or whatever. But no, there is, and vice versa, take the most extroverted person in the world. How many interviews have you read with famous actors and musicians and whatever who clearly enjoy being around people, who talk about how exhausting it is to be on the red carpet, to be in the public eye all the time, etc. So D&D is a great example because this is intended to be a collaborative experience, which is, I think, what you're worrying about. That's my guess here is I don't want to overrun them because this is supposed to be collaborative, not competitive, blah, blah, blah. D&D in a lot of ways is like group therapy. In that a lot of group therapy is designed, or at least a lot of the value of group therapy is intended to be that in the interactions within the group, people are able to reenact. I don't know. People will be very analytical about it, and I would rather avoid that language. Basically, it means if you're somebody who yells at people a lot, you're probably going to yell at somebody in the group. If you're somebody who talks a lot, you're probably going to talk a lot in the group. If you're somebody who hangs back and is a wallflower, you're probably going to do that in the group. The point of it being in a therapy group is that there's a facilitator there who can call attention to those things as opposed to your thinking about them, point them out. In D&D, you can't, well, anytime, but you can't know what other people want or don't want. You can make your guesses, and some of us pick up more information about things than others, and therefore we make guesses that are more likely to be useful or accurate, but it's still a guess. If you want to say, maybe I'm talking too much, that's a statement you could say at any time if what you're thinking is, nobody would tell me if I am. The best thing you can do for both yourself and for them is to engage in the way that you want to engage and focus on what it is that you're doing. If they have a problem with it, you're giving them an opportunity to do or say something about that in a relatively, hopefully, supportive and safe environment. Hopefully that's what your D&D group is. That's part of why D&D is so fun, especially for certain kinds of people that tend to think a lot about social interaction, or no, not or, just people who tend to think a lot about social interaction. That can be because, not because, that can be people who typically do well as far as getting what they want out of social interactions, and or people who typically do poorly meaning don't get what they want out of social interactions. Either of those things can correlate with paying a lot of close attention. There's a reason that a lot of actors and improvers and whatever like D&D, and also a lot of, like, you know, people who would describe themselves as introverts. But in that environment, you're giving them an opportunity to explore that. At work, it might be very hard for them to say, hey, I want to say some stuff too here. And in the D&D group, hopefully, if it's run well and you're feeling safe and you know each other, it's a little bit easier to say something like that. So you're being helpful to people by being yourself. My introvert friends identify as introvert. We're running out of time here. Do I think it's a label that does some harm we don't usually acknowledge? Yeah. I think it makes people more reclusive than they might otherwise be if they didn't automatically withdraw when they're tired. But I don't have a lot of social anxiety, so I don't want to project my experience. I would love to play in a group where I'm confident the DM will reach out if there's a problem. I try to be that DM when I can. Social feedback is important. All of that is true, yes. Another way of talking about social feedback, we call it reality checking. It is the checking for the monster in the closet. That if I am worried that other people think I'm a jerk, and then I talk with other people and they respond to me in ways that make me feel as though they think I'm not a jerk, then I worry less about whether I'm a jerk. If I think this could be true, this could be true, this could be many different things could be true, and I put it out there and everybody responds that this one is the true one, then I'm going to stop worrying so much about those other ones. And yeah, that's true about introverts for sure. And that's true about all labels. It's a potential harm of any label, any identity. Let me answer that question because that's a good practical one. But yeah, if you think of identities as dictating your behavior as opposed to being a way to encapsulate your experience somehow. How do I ask my DM to let me know if I'm being a jerk without being a jerk about it? Well, it depends on your relationship with the DM and blah, 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 obviously. But we have 2 minutes, so I'm going to go fast. You talk to the DM outside of the group setting, either before or after a particular session, or generally it would probably be best to do it on a different day, because then there's not as much about having to try and do it quickly, or if you do it right after a session, they might be trying to rethink about what just happened that you might be referring to. Whereas if you're talking about a more general thing in between, 3 days later, then it can be more a general conversation. And again, it depends on how safe and comfortable you are with your DM. They're not stressed about the session they have to run. Well, that's great. And if you throw something at them at the last minute, that might take them into a place where they are starting to stress more, right? That now it's not just about running the session, but I also got to somehow. So talk to them in between game times, tell them your concerns and have a conversation about it. Ask them to set some time aside, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Oh, sorry, I meant if you talk to them on a different day, they wouldn't be. Yeah, then they don't have to worry so much. Yeah, you're not juggling as much. And it depends on how you're feeling, how they're feeling. You can set it up as give me a signal, a secret signal that other people won't know that you can then watch out for. You can set it up as, hey, can I talk with you after, the session, like the day or 2 days after, and ask you questions about specific things where I was worried that maybe I was a jerk, and you can tell me whether you thought I was or not. But mainly it's just about communicating with them outside of that situation. Of course, that relies on that you feel comfortable talking with them. And just as a last little button here, yeah, I misread that comment. Remember, communication, we are trying to do the bare minimum necessary in order to evoke the response, that we're intending to have. And we're trying to do the bare minimum necessary to interpret that response in a way that is somewhat accurate to the person's intent. And in this case, I missed it. Doesn't matter whether it's I misread it or you misspoke or whatever, that was too vague. We just came away with different interpretations, and then you clarified, and it's easy. That's another part of what can be helpful about these conversations, is to make sure that it's a no blame thing. That it's not my fault, your fault, whatever. It's just my intention is this. You're not intending to be a jerk. You're in fact putting a lot of effort and intention into not being a jerk. If somehow you are being a jerk, it's in a way that you are not noticing and can't understand. And so it's useful to have somebody else to be able to offer that back to you. Hey, this thing actually bothers that person because you might not know this, but blah, blah, blah. And now you know. If you internalize that as, oh no, I'm a terrible person, I've been a jerk all along, and it makes you feel worse, then all that does is makes that other person more of a burden. Maybe they don't perceive that you're feeling that way, or maybe they do. If they do, they're going to probably feel bad about having made you feel bad. And it makes it less likely that you will have these conversations again in the future, because if you find out that it's the thing you didn't want and you feel terrible about yourself and go into a depressive spiral, then you're going to be less likely to check again later. So you just say, you make your intentions clear. This is what I'm trying to do. This is my concern. If I am doing the thing that I'm concerned that I might be doing, it's because I don't realize it, and I would appreciate you offering me that information. I don't take it as a criticism. I just take it as there's something that I didn't notice, and you're helping me out by pointing it out to me. If, for example, I use a word that I think of as innocuous, but somebody else feels triggered by, but I don't know that, and they try to hide that from me and whatever, then if and when somebody eventually does tell me that, I don't say, oh my God, what a jerk I've been. I want to say, oh, good, I'm glad I know that now, and I can make that change. Because then I want to know more again in the future, instead of, I can't check, because if it turns out to be the monster is in the closet, I am destroyed. Anyway, good to be with you all. I got to move on. Yeah, I'll be back next week, same time.